start a very straightforward introductory question, and that is if you could maybe introduce yourself to our audience and share your story with us before we go into more specific questions. So, who is Viktoria Maladaeva? I don't know if I pronounce it correctly. So.
Yes, I'm Viktoria Maladaeva, Buddhist activist, a human rights defender. I'm a founder of the Indigenous of Russia Foundation, and I was born and raised in Republic of Buryatia, in an ordinary family, low-income, single-parent family. My mother raised 4 of us. I have 3 sisters. I studied in Buddhist National School, where I taught Buddhist language and learned about our culture and traditions. And I was raised in Buddhist culture basically. And after school, I moved to Saint Petersburg to study because as any national republic in Buryatia, it's poor regions, undeveloped, and with high corruption and debt. And so in order to achieve success or get a good job, you have to get a good education. And so we decided to move to St. Petersburg to study, where I first faced with racism and discrimination. Because I was raised in, and I went to a Buddhist national school. I was in kind of like Buddhist bubble, and for me, moving into like predominantly white Slavic city was challenging. And as a 17 years old, constantly hearing slurs like churka, or even like constantly being attacked in a subway. It was a traumatic experience. And when I gave birth to my daughter, and my neighbors' kids started going to school in St. Petersburg, he started facing discrimination in elementary school. So then we decided as a family that we don't want my daughter to go through this experience, a horrible experience. And in 2014, I decided to participate in a beauty pageant, Mrs. St. Petersburg, which wasn't popular at the time. Like it was rarely covered in the media, even in the local St. Petersburg media, it wasn't covered at all. And so I decided just for myself, and I didn't have any hesitation because of my ethnicity, because I doesn't look Slavic enough. And so there was an online competition as well where I was winning, because traditionally when Buryat or Kalmyk or Saha person is competing in Western Slavic cities in Russia, usually like whole republic supports, whether it's sports, beauty pageant, or culture pageant, or event or competition. And so I wasn't surprised that I received a lot of support from my republic, not only from my republic, but also from Republic of Sakha, Republic of Kalmykia, and Tuva. And so I was gaining online recognition, and then of course it started like piling up. People were like local St. Petersburg people started complaining that I'm not Slavic, I can't be Mrs. St. Petersburg. And on top of that, they found out that I was opposing Putin and his policies, the annexation of Crimea. And so that was like a dangerous combination for ultra far right people. And they started attacking me. I started receiving threats. And my life was basically in danger. But I won the title of, and then it was really hard time for me because it was like so traumatic, and I became famous like overnight. I went viral overnight. I had journalists coming from Czech Republic and other cities, and so ultimately it also drew attention of ultra far right nationalists who started sending me threats, and so we decided to move from Russia and to San Francisco. So in 2015, I ended up in San Francisco, and since then I've been living here, raising my daughter. She's 14 now. And when the war, full-scale invasion started in 2022, I co-founded ethnic anti-war organization called Free Buryatia Foundation. And then in 2023, I left the organization due to internal conflicts, and I founded an organization called the Indigenous of Russia Foundation that is advocates and for indigenous people's rights, unites communities, and raise awareness about Russian colonialism, extractivism, colonial policies, and the war, criminal war in Ukraine.
Yeah, it's very, I don't even know what to say. I also read like some stuff from other interviews, and I wanted to ask you if, because for me it was very surprising that there is this like strong discrimination between like native Russians and then like non-native Russians. What do you think are like the main drivers of this discrimination? Because I find it, that's something I can understand, because maybe it's because Russia is such a huge country and many people who live in the center, as you said, you know, the Saint Petersburg, I think it's like the second largest city of Russia. So maybe they are somehow disconnected from the other regions, or what would you say is are the reasons?
Well, I think it's a combination of historic imperial mindset that has been in place for generations. When you read books from imperial Tsar time about indigenous lands, about so-called they called it like освоение Siberia, about the colonization of Siberia or Caucasus or South Caucasus or Central Asia. They, in plain sight, they write like about us, how we are like savages that needs to be civilized, etc., etc., that our customs and traditions savage, and so on. And that has never been acknowledged properly when not even during Soviet time. So basically in Soviet time, they decided to go with this propaganda of дружба народов, friendship of people. And they removed all the history about colonization of Siberia and indigenous peoples. And they successfully placed this propaganda on all national republics that that our ancestors basically came to travel to Moscow, Saint Petersburg, and bow to the Tsar, and decided to join Russia. But it's a huge lie, of course, and propaganda. And even during Soviet time, Buryat people had slurs to, like, they would call local Russian people in Zabaikalsky Krai, where also Buryat lives. So Buryat lives in 3 regions. Historically, our ancestors' land, separated by borders. Regional borders, it's Zabaikalsky Krai, Republic of Buryatia, and Irkutsk Oblast, Irkutsk region. And even back then, like during Soviet time, Buryat had like bad names, slurs, and etc. And they've been discriminated if you move to Moscow and Saint Petersburg. And this imperial mindset never went away, basically, and Putin has just amplified voices of this far-right movement, supporting them, and these movements are basically state-backed and supported. They have their offices in basically every major city in Russia now, called Русская община and Северный человек, northern people. I'm sorry, I'm very cold right now. I'm in a mountain region.
It's
So my
okay.
voice may be shaking, not because I'm nervous, but because it's so cold outside. Maybe I should have just grabbed a blanket. Anyway,
But feel free if you need to feel free to grab a jacket. That's completely fine.
no, I don't want to interrupt the interview. I have a tea here. And so I stopped. So yeah, this imperial mindset and attitude towards indigenous peoples and non-Slavic people has never changed. We were always considered as little brothers. I think Baltic countries and Central Asian countries could relate to that, because we were all during Soviet time considered as a little brothers to Russians, to Russia. And after the Soviet collapse, nation republics also were considered as like little brothers. So, and this racism and discrimination was never acknowledged. And although Putin also liked to say that we are a united, beautiful country, but it's a multi-ethnic, multi-religious country where even in our constitution, Russian people considered as state-forming people, which is, of course, it's discriminatory to other nations. And our languages has been suppressed even during Soviet time. For example, Budyat language in 1930s was completely banned and has been repeating. And I think in 1960s also was banned again, and then in 1980s our custom and traditions like Saralgan was banned completely, and people would shame if you would speak Buddhist language. And so this it's combination, when you feel shame for your first indigeneity, of your ethnicity, of your language, and racism and discrimination basically is, and we were brainwashed, of course, like we never had historical justice. We don't know, we don't learn our real history about our people. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's all intensified since the full scale of invasion of Ukraine. And when Putin claimed like he will denazify, one of the mission to start this full aggressive, full-scale invasion of Ukraine is to denazify Ukraine, which was like a slap on our faces of non-Slavic people, because we had constantly been under racism and discrimination in Russia. Or there have been like a lot of attacks of women and children, non-Slavic, Buddhist people, Caucasus, and Muslim people, and targeted raids on migrant communities, on where do they live and work. And basically in Russia, you have been attacked because you look as like non-Slavic person, even though like we are Russian citizens, but it doesn't save us from attacks and police searches. Because when I used to live in Saint Petersburg, I would always have to carry my passport. Because police racially profiling people in the subway or in a major streets in St. Petersburg and Moscow to check the documents, and they usually just stop non-Slavic looking people.
Maybe it's I actually wanted to ask you this question, like if the war actually intensified the violations of indigenous people's rights, but I had another question in mind, and I also wanted to ask you first, like, what is the difference between the decolonization process happening in Russia compared to the one happening in Western countries? But now my question is there even any decolonization process happening? Because from what you said, I feel like the situation, maybe you're gonna disagree, but I feel like the situation is even getting, I don't want to say worse, but it's definitely not getting any better.
Well, yeah, of course, because the war gave an excuse to state to expand surveillance, censorship, and militarization, especially in national republics. They cut off internet completely. For example, when there were mass protests in village of Baimak in Republic of Bashkortostan. They completely banned all internet, and people were just, walking. They blocked the roads to the village, knowing that thousands of people are going to support Fail Sinov, famous Bashkort activist. Uh, and she's an environmental activist. Or, for example, when mobilization started, my friend Sergelana Kondakova and her team, Free Yakutia Foundation, they have launched a protest, basically in the Republic of Sakha, in Yakutsk. 500, women showed up to the protest against mobilization, against the war. And so the first protest was successful. They danced their traditional dance. They were singing and just crying. When I was looking at that, I was also crying and just heartbroken because of the women's, and this was, I think, one of the largest women protests in modern history in Russia. And so they decided to do a second protest a few days later. And of course, state found out through their social media, and they sent a plane with the Rosgvardia. It's one of the units of Russian forces. And so they sent a full plane of these forces to stop the protests. And of course, they were grabbing everyone on the street. And my friends in Free Kuti Foundation helped raise money for the to pay the fines and release basically these women. And so the state, of course, the war gave an excuse to expand all the surveillance, and Russia has banned non-existent anti-Russian separatist movement, and falsely labeling 55 indigenous-led organizations as extremists, targeting indigenous activists. Even like before the war, Russian state and extractivist companies would target indigenous people, indigenous activists who defend their lands, defend their rights, and silencing them through censorship, through arrests and fines. And for indigenous people, like fine 100,000 rubles, it's a lot. And then, and since the war, and then after labeling 55 indigenous-led organization as extremists, Russia then falsely labeled also 172 organizations. A lot of them do not exist, but most of them are indigenous-led or regional organization, and Russia has labeled them as a terrorist, basically criminalizing indigenous rights in Russia.
Yeah, but the one thing that I don't understand is that, like, how are they benefiting from, employing so much violence and so much, I don't know, just this systematic oppression that is happening, as you said, for now, I guess for decades, for centuries. What do
Well,
they
it's a simple
get
question.
out
It's
of it?
money. How it's benefiting its money. Russian oil, gas, and other resources on indigenous land. Yamalo-Nenetsky Autonomous Okrug, for example, is number one in producing oil and gas in Russia, and it's a land of Nenет people, and they don't benefit from all this extractive industry at all. They sent to this residential schools where they take kids forcibly, basically from the family, and place them in this residential schools where kids face racism and discrimination, not till nowadays, and they don't learn their language, their cultures, and this is practice of assimilation of indigenous peoples. And our organization actually have produced a documentary about the legacy and the history of residential schools for indigenous peoples in far northern Russia. Hopefully we'll soon be able to launch it on YouTube for everyone to see. And it combines stories of different indigenous peoples in different geographical regions and from different generations, to show how it's a systematic abuse of indigenous people, kids, happens even today. And so Russia is benefiting from the exploiting indigenous lands, suppressing our voices, because we are defenders of our land, of our ancestral land. And when people protest, for example, in Weimar case, when people protest their lands, Fedelsynov and others, they protest their ancestral land. They don't want, because their kids will live for generations in this lands. Those we say it like in Russian, like basically foreigners, but they're Russians, or maybe not Russians, but they will just come and take everything, the resources, they destroy our environment, destroy our land and pollute. But they leave, they take everything and they leave. But our kids will stay there and live for generations. But what is going to be left after all these extractive activities, right? And so, yeah, it's money. It's all about money. And when Putin or even like Russian opposition, they speak about beautiful united Russia. Yes, it is multi-ethnic, multi-religions, but they speak about territories. They don't talk about people in those territories. It's all about like territories and resources for them. Because if Nation Republic will gain independence, then Russia won't have those extractive resources like oil, gas, OJ, for example, in Buryatia. Buryatia produces like more than 90% of jade, and it's all the money and taxes that all goes to Moscow, and then Moscow unevenly distributes money throughout the regions.
Yeah, so what would you say are the I don't want to say the big, so my question is how the world views that Indigenous and Buryat and Siberian people have, how do they differ from the basically state-centered narratives in Russia? I think you already touched upon this, but what would you say are like let's say the key differences, or I don't know how to frame it.
Well, first of all, Buryat people officially are not recognized as indigenous in Russia. Russia has discriminatory laws that you can be indigenous and claim those like limited indigenous rights if you, for example, if your nation is less than 50,000 people, if you still live like traditional way of life, etc., which is ridiculous. Like, you can be urban, you can live in big cities and just still be indigenous. This law like exists nowhere anywhere in the world. What if you like nations will be 1,000 people more, for example, next year, then it people will be like 50,010. So they're not going to be they're not going to have any indigenous rights then. It's so ridiculous. And so Russia specifically had put these laws, discriminatory laws, because Sakha, Buryat, Bashkort, Kalmyk people were all indigenous, and we should have our rights that are under international laws and United Nations recognitions. When we go to international platforms, indigenous to Russia, we also, as a part of our advocacy program, we collaborate with human rights, international human rights organizations, and organize advocacy events, side events at the UN, OCCE. And when we go to international platform, we speak about our violations of indigenous people rights. A lot of people don't even know, like my indigenous colleague from sisters from different parts of the world. First of all, they've never heard of that Russia has indigenous peoples. And second of all, they've never heard about Buddhist people. Even like in Europe, I think like a lot, or in Asia, for example, as an Asian person, when we like go to Asia, and a lot of people start assuming, oh, I'm from Japan or Korea, but they never heard that Russia has like so many Asian people of different cultures, religions, and nations. In regions, so and even North Asian regions is non-existent in the world map, for example. And so we're trying to amplify, as our organization, try to amplify voices of indigenous peoples. So we will be visible.
Yeah,
I
and
think I hope I answered the question.
yes, yes, of course. And also, I think I read it in one of your Instagram posts. You mentioned that there is like yeah, and you also talked about it right now, that there is like a huge gap in knowledge, as you said, like not even worldwide, but also within like Russia territories. That let's say you have one group of indigenous people, like living on the Russian territory, and then you have I I don't remember the specific number, but I was surprised. I think there is like more than 100 indigenous group in Russia, almost 200. I don't know if I'm mistaken, but I was also genuinely surprised because that's also what we are trying to do, and that's also something I'm learning through UR, the importance of the role that indigenous people play on the global scale. We cannot even comprehend that, especially if you're someone who are not coming from from that communities, or even if you are coming from the communities, you know.
Well, it's a successful policy of Russian state, divide and conquer. Yes, even among our indigenous group in Russia, we knew little about each other, and not even like about our history, but about each other, about Tuva, Kalmyk. Sorry, my dog. This is getting crazy. Um, and it's a policy of divide and conquer.
Yeah, and if you would have
How
to not
to
have
do,
yeah.
that's how any empire. Sorry. I apologize.
No, it's completely fine. I also come from a big family, so there's always a lot of people around. So yeah, but we were talking about yeah that the knowledge is not shared within the communities, and also like yeah within the specific indigenous communities, but also between each other. So that's what we were talking about, and I wanted to ask you if you would have to, if there is like any specific teachings or like ancestral knowledge or story that maybe guides your activism, or it's more, would you say it's more like based on your personal experience, like for instance what you mentioned like was happening to you when you moved to Saint Petersburg, or if you maybe remember something from your, I don't know, childhood or when you were studying.
Sure. So Buddhist people, we practice shamanism and Buddhism. And when something like that's happening, for example, when this scandal in Saint Petersburg broke, and I went to Daza and I did some shaman rituals as well to cleanse the aura and to overcome basically all these challenges and hate. And since the full scale of invasion of Ukraine, like uh, I started this opposition against Putin and against the war as a woman, and because I knew I couldn't stay quiet. And historically, in Mongol societies, women have held an important role in societies and always had. Sorry, the dog is crazy. I apologize.
I cannot hear it, so it should be okay.
And so we always had the strong voices, and even now the colonial indigenous movement in Russia is predominantly women-led. Anti-colonial movement is community organizers and leaders are women. And I think our strength comes from our ancestors and from our collective memory. Um, and it's not about like being brave or exceptional. It's just I think it's at least in Mongolian society. I think it's just the way how women in our culture have always had this strong role and protecting people and speaking up the truth. And yeah, I think so. The women's leadership in our movements is not surprising. Maybe surprising for outsiders, but for us, it was not.
Yeah, I think that's actually a very good point because yeah, when we look at the I don't know political landscape, in the whole world, we can see dominantly men. And yeah, that's also interesting difference between like how indigenous communities approach the leaderships. And yeah, and I have one concrete question for you, and I'm personally very interested in that question. I also read it on your Instagram, I think, because you talk about something that I found very interesting. And I think you call it like a process of decolonizing your mind. And maybe we also like already started talking about this, but if you could maybe go into more detail, so how did that process look like for you?
Mhm. Sure. As I said, we didn't learn our real history in school. So for me, decolonizing your mind means learning about your roots, learning about your people, your history, because I knew the custom and tradition, and I grew up in a Buddhist society. So um, in our custom and traditions, but I didn't know about our history. So I started reading books. And luckily, Buddha's are one of the most researched nations, indigenous nation in Russia. So I had resources available online, and so I started reading and learning about our real culture during Tsar time, during Imperial Russia, during Soviet Union. Um, and I found a lot of answers there, actually. How it's interesting how, like, 100 years ago, our ancestors were also divided, between when so Buddhist people declared independence in 1920 from Imperial Russia, and they formed a state. But of course, when Bolshevik came, there were a lot of fighting and a lot of resistance from Buddhist people as well. And it's interesting to see like how 100 years ago they were also talks about like, should we stay with Russia or should we be independent? That we should save our language and culture. But then 100 years later, we are in the same spot, basically. Only our language is officially is endangered, and it's sad to see that's fading away. But thanks to a lot of language activists that are fighting still today, they're fighting for a Buddhist language in schools, taught in schools. So for me, it's all about learning first, learning about your roots and your history and culture. And with all this knowledge, I think like you can effectively maybe like say the truth and educate people, raise awareness about our issues that there are not new, that our people have been fighting for decades and generations for our rights. It's not something that, oh, we just now started like fighting for our
Yeah.
people in 2022. You learn that my people were fighting when Soviet Union banned Buddhist language. They were resisting all these discriminatory laws in 80s, 60s, 40s, and 20s, or even like back then in 17th century, they were all resisting Russian invaders and colonial policies. And so that gives me strength, to continue my work, to continue my activism and defend Indigenous people's rights, because I know that they have been also fighting, but and so we cannot stop. It's a process, and there will be people after me that, and there are already, a lot of people. It's not only just me, of course. The generations to come, there will be people fighting because it's in our nature to fight for our language, culture, land, and so it's all connecting, and it's I think it gives strength for sure.
Yeah, because I also feel like you're fighting for what is word, you are not fighting for some abstract stuff like power, money, I don't know, acceptance.
Yeah,
Like these
for
things
sure.
are essential not only for your survival, and that's something that I think a lot of people should understand, that
Mhm.
when you're fighting for your rights, you're fighting for everyone.
Yes. Okay.
And yeah, I also wanted to ask you because, well, as you mentioned, now you live in San Francisco, and would you say that the fact that you move out from Russia maybe strengthen your activism, or maybe on the other hand, I don't know, do you feel more motivated now when you live abroad
Mhm.
yeah.
Definitely, because there's all this censorship in Russia. I think Buddhist people in general who are in exile, or indigenous, or any anti-war voices in exile has an obligation um, to fight the propaganda of militarism, of war, of colonialism of Russia, um, because those who are in Russia, unfortunately, under a lot of pressure, a lot of discrimination, and I think, yeah, Russians abroad just have to fight this because historically, I mean, diaspora played a lot of roles in protecting the rights of people at home, back home, and connecting communities with the international human rights organization, with the media, for example. When the mobilization started, I went overnight in Russia because I started receiving a lot of reports. And when I first started receiving, I was like, oh, this is weird, like this coming from a lot of people. And so I decided to post it because I was just curious if it's happening like in different districts within Buryatia. And so when I woke up and it just, my GM was flooded. so I started posting more, and it's just becoming something more, and it went overnight, and people were reposting, media journalists, and so I was connecting a lot of international journalists and organization with people in Buryatia, or even like in different regions. So I think, yes, like anti-war Russian voices should be motivated, because we are fighting for our people, and we should be silence, because we live like in free. Yeah,
Sorry to interrupt, but
that's
now
probably that.
I couldn't hear the last two sentences because I don't know, something happened.
So
Sorry.
where did I stop? No worries, no worries. Where did I stop? Where did you stop hearing me?
Um, I heard that Russia people who are living abroad should be motivated to, support.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Russian anti-war communities or people who oppose the war, of course, should um, use their voices and platform anywhere to speak about the truth about the war, the discrimination, censorship, militarization, and propaganda in Russia, because we all have relatives there,
Yeah,
and we
exactly.
should, yeah, we shouldn't forget about our people who lives under immense pressure and discrimination and censorship in diaspora. Yeah, like I said, historically, different countries has played important role on bringing attention to human rights violations in their home countries, etc., etc.
Yeah, even though I feel that sometimes people who leave their home country because of several reasons, sometimes I feel like it's easier to forget. And but I think that's a beautiful part, and you leave your country, but you don't. It's still your homeland. You still feel connected to it. And
Yeah.
as one of the not concluding questions, but one of the almost concluding question I want to ask you, if you could maybe give recommendation to all of us, to maybe non-Indigenous community, even here in Europe, everywhere in the world, how could we show solidarity in a way that is ethical, responsible, and not non-appropriative?
Mhm. There are different ways to support independent Indigenous voices, of course. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a work like this, amplifying Indigenous voices, especially women voices from Russia. It's, uh, it helps a lot, because as a Buddhist and Indigenous woman, we're often excluded in international platforms or media when they're talking about Russia. You often hear of mostly like Moscow-centric voices, or from Saint Petersburg, who doesn't have the same experience as we have. And amplifying our voices is one way of helping Indigenous communities. Of course, supporting financially is another way of supporting, because also historically our organizations didn't have any support in not even Russia, but like also international support. And donors often don't know about Indigenous resistance, or it's just like too complicated for them, because we're not solely focused on, for example, feminist rights, women's rights, or gender-based violence, or environmental issues, or I don't know, LGBTQ plus rights. We are fighting for Indigenous people's rights, and it includes everything that touches our life, basically our lands. It means environmental issues. As a woman, we of course fight for against gender-based violence. We amplify feminist voices through intersectional feminist lens. We support. We're fighting against discriminatory laws against indigenous LGBTQ plus rights. Actually, Indigenous of Russia Foundation had launched a first documentary about intersection of in LGBTQ and indigenous struggles in Russia, amplifying stories of four LGBTQ peoples, Kalmyk, Buryat, and Tatar. So it's everything that touches our life. It's important, and we donors often do not understand the intersectionality and the complexity of our movements and the work
Um, it
and
froze again.
strained, but we're still fighting, and we will continue working.
Yeah, it's a lot of yeah,
Lost
it
connection.
froze off. It froze for a bit, but I think it was all right. I think there is just an issue maybe with the screen, but it's okay.
Oh, okay. And then connecting with media or journalists or international platforms and organization, another way of supporting indigenous communities as well. There are so many brave and just awesome people that I know who are also in the forefront of indigenous resistance in Russia, who deserve to be in international conferences and platform and raise awareness about our issues and human rights violations and national republics. And um, what else? I
I
think maybe, yeah.
I actually have one more question if you don't mind, because now when you were talking about like how even like a Russian NGO should be, present at the conference, I got this question that do you feel like due to war in Ukraine that maybe even Russia organizations they are supporting indigenous people, do you feel they are maybe I don't want to say discriminated against, but excluded, from I don't know, from like
Mhm.
this, not even like a platform, but from like a social space where they can,
Mhm.
yeah,
In Russia,
explain.
you mean in Russia or in
I mean
anti-war
more,
communities?
I mean more like on international level, because we saw it that now everybody is blaming Russia for what happened in Ukraine, of course, but we still have to think about people who are not in support of this system. So yeah, do you feel like is there this exclusion maybe or
Mm, I mean, I know, I don't think there is exclusion or discrimination. In Europe, they still travel freely, like Russian people can get visa. I know that there has been a lot of like backlash against Europe when they banned multi-visa for Russians, but they still have like one I mean, as a person who had problems with like visas, Schengen visas, I've been denied Schengen visa too. Even when the war started, I've been denied visas too.
Mm.
But I never had like any urge to criticize Europe countries, for denying visa to me. Because my country is an aggressor. My country illegally invaded another country, Ukraine, and violating just doing a lot atrocities and violating human rights. And so I never had any urge, but a lot of anti-war Russian communities they criticize, Europe's decision to ban multi-entry visa, which I think is not that much drama. I don't know. So I don't think there's like a discrimination or anything. Because for non-Slavic or like even I heard from Central Asian activists that it was so hard for them to get
Yeah.
Schengen visa because it's also like racist, and
Mm.
often they often get denied even like written visa. Um, a friend of mine who is was from Kyrgyzstan, and he was attending TED Talks in Britain, and he was denied visa, although he had all the papers that he will be as a keynote speaker at TED events, but he was denied. So, and he didn't cry. Or a lot of I think people from global south have dealt with it, and dealing still with it. Look at what the US is doing, like banning all the visa and uh,
Yeah, that's also another story.
yeah, it's another story for another day. But
Yeah,
thank you so much.
another.
Yeah.
Of course, I have the last question, and that is that first, if you maybe in the future, if in any way, if you would be interested in the collaboration with United Rising and Indigenous people of Russia, these doors are open. And I don't know if you would be interested, maybe that's something you need to also consider. So it's not like you need to give me an answer now, or I just wanted to state that. And yeah, before we conclude, do you have any, I don't know, final thoughts, final message that you would like to share with all of us?
Well, I just want to thank you for your time and for your questions, for your interest on Indigenous rights. I appreciate and grateful for amplifying our voices, and I hope we can collaborate in the future. I'm very interested. And for those who are watching, please go to our Instagram or YouTube, Indigenous of Russia Foundation, and check out um, my friends, activists, Asians of Russia, Free Equity Foundation, Nutiva from the Republic. There are so many, not so many, but there are independent indigenous-led organizations in media that deserve your uh, attention and support. So thank you so much again for inviting me. I appreciate.
Thank you so much for accepting this invite. I really enjoyed this interview. I think it was very fruitful session, and I think we also can include some of the organization and individuals you mentioned when we're gonna share this video. And yeah, of course, hopefully talk soon in any possible way. And thank you again very much
Likewise.
for sharing your insights and knowledge.
Mhm. Oh,
Okay.
my pleasure. My pleasure.